Picture a brilliant engineer who has spent millions of years designing the most sophisticated machine in the known universe. This machine can heal its own wounds. It can fight off microscopic invaders with an immune army of extraordinary complexity. It can rewire its own neural architecture in response to new information. It can grow an entirely new human being from a single cell. It regulates its internal temperature, monitors its chemical balance, coordinates trillions of simultaneous cellular processes, and does all of this without any conscious input from the person operating it. And then, after all of that, after producing something so astonishingly capable that we still don't fully understand how it works after centuries of dedicated scientific investigation, the engineer just lets it fall apart. Not dramatically, not all at once, slowly, methodically, inexorably, the joints start aching. The eyes lose their focus. The immune system that once dispatched pathogens with lethal efficiency begins fumbling its responses. The cardiovascular system accumulates damage it can no longer fully repair. The brain, that 3-pound wonder that built civilizations and wrote symphonies and figured out the age of the universe, starts losing neurons it cannot replace. The whole extraordinary apparatus that took 9 months to construct and 20 years to fully assemble begins somewhere around 30. Its quiet but unstoppable decline toward failure. Why? That is the question. Not in the emotional, why does this have to happen to me sense, though that question is understandable and entirely valid, but in the cold, mechanistic, evolutionary sense. Why would natural selection, the most ruthless optimizer in the history of life on Earth, produce something so magnificent and then fail to fix this one enormous, obvious problem? Why did billions of years of evolution, which solved challenges of staggering complexity, apparently look at aging and decide, yeah, we're going to leave that one? The answer is simultaneously fascinating, deeply counterintuitive, and, depending on your philosophical disposition, either deeply liberating or profoundly infuriating. The first thing that needs to be cleared up is the assumption embedded in the question itself. That evolution failed to fix aging. That framing implies evolution tried and came up short. That aging is a bug the system couldn't eliminate. But this assumes that natural selection was working against aging in the first place. And the actual picture is considerably more complicated than that. Natural selection operates on reproductive success. The fundamental currency of evolution is not survival, not longevity, not health. It is the transmission of genes to the next generation. An organism that lives 200 years but reproduces rarely is, from evolution's perspective, substantially less successful than an organism that lives 2 years and reproduces constantly. Longevity only matters insofar as it contributes to reproductive output. Beyond that threshold, it is essentially invisible to selection. This distinction between what is good for the individual and what is good for gene transmission is the central key to understanding why aging exists. Once you internalize it, the apparent paradox dissolves. Evolution didn't fail to fix aging. Evolution was never primarily motivated to fix aging. The two goals, maximizing reproductive success and maximizing lifespan, are related but not identical. And where they diverge, evolution follows reproductive success every time, without exception, because that is literally all it can do. The theoretical framework that crystallizes this understanding was developed by evolutionary biologist Peter Medawar in 1952, elaborated by George Williams in 1957, and further developed by Thomas Kirkwood in subsequent decades. Together, their ideas form the foundation of modern evolutionary theories of aging, and they are, once understood, almost impossible to argue with. Medawar's contribution begins with a thought experiment. Imagine a population of animals living in the wild. Let's say mice, because mice have the decency to make the math clean. These mice are subject to the usual hazards of wild existence: predators, disease, starvation, accidents, bad weather, the general hostility of a world that does not particularly care about any individual mouse's continued existence. The result is a mortality curve that eliminates most individuals long before they approach anything like maximum possible lifespan. Now, suppose a mutation arises that has a harmful effect, one that causes cellular damage, organ degradation, some form of physiological decline. But suppose this mutation only expresses its harmful effects late in life. Not in the first year, not in the second year, but in the 5th year, say, by which point most wild mice have already been eaten, starved, or otherwise removed from the population. From natural selection's perspective, a mutation that harms you in your 5th year is almost invisible. The vast majority of individuals who carry it never live long enough for the harm to manifest. Those individuals reproduce, pass the mutation on, and selection has essentially no opportunity to identify and eliminate it, because the damage happens after most of the reproduction has already occurred. Now flip it. A mutation that harms you in your first year, before you've had a chance to reproduce significantly, gets eliminated from the population rapidly and efficiently. Selection can see it clearly. Its effects are immediate and directly reduce reproductive output. It gets purged. The implication is stark. Natural selection's ability to weed out harmful mutations declines with age. Mutations that cause harm early in life face intense selective pressure. Mutations that cause harm late in life face almost none. Over evolutionary time, a population accumulates a library of late-acting harmful mutations that selection simply cannot reach. Because by the time they matter, selection has already stopped paying attention. This is called mutation accumulation theory, and it is one of the two main evolutionary explanations for why aging exists. Aging, under this framework, is not a designed feature or even a selected-for trait. It is an accumulation of evolutionary garbage, harmful genetic variants that selection couldn't eliminate because they only cause damage after reproduction has largely concluded. George Williams added a second, darker, and arguably more elegant mechanism: antagonistic pleiotropy. Pleiotropy refers to the phenomenon where a single gene affects multiple traits simultaneously. A gene that influences bone density might also affect calcium metabolism elsewhere in the body. A gene that shapes immune function might simultaneously influence inflammatory responses. The genome is not a clean, modular system with one gene for one trait. It is a densely interconnected network where most genes touch multiple systems at once. Antagonistic pleiotropy describes the situation where a single gene has positive effects early in life and negative effects late in life. Williams's insight was that natural selection would actively favor such genes, because the early benefit, occurring during the period of maximum reproductive output, would be visible and selectable, while the late harm, occurring after most reproduction has already happened, would be largely invisible. Consider a gene that increases the efficiency of bone calcification in young adulthood, improving skeletal strength and reproductive success, but causes arterial calcification later in life, contributing to cardiovascular disease. From a fitness perspective, this gene is a bargain. It trades a late harm for an early benefit. Natural selection, which weighs early benefits heavily and late harms lightly, accepts this trade enthusiastically. The gene spreads through the population. The early benefit is selected for. The late harm comes along for the ride, unable to be separated from the benefit that carries it. Williams argued that the genome of every animal that ages likely contains many such genes, variants selected precisely because of their early benefits, dragging their late costs behind them like an evolutionary tax that doesn't come due until selection has stopped caring about the invoice. Aging under antagonistic pleiotropy is not merely tolerated by evolution. It is, perversely, actively promoted, because the genetic changes that cause late life decline are often the same changes that enhanced early life fitness. This reframes aging in a way that is genuinely unsettling if you sit with it long enough. The processes causing your body to deteriorate as you age may not be random failures of maintenance. They may be the downstream consequences of genetic variants that made your ancestors better at surviving and reproducing during their prime years. The vitality of youth and the decline of age may be two expressions of the same underlying genetic architecture, inseparable without dismantling something that was doing important work when it mattered most to evolution. Thomas Kirkwood's contribution was the disposable soma theory, which approaches the question from the angle of energy economics rather than mutation dynamics. Every organism has a finite energy budget. That budget must be allocated across competing biological needs: growth, reproduction, immune function, cellular repair, and maintenance of existing tissues. These demands compete with each other in real time. Energy devoted to one function is energy unavailable for another. Cellular repair and maintenance is expensive. Repairing DNA damage, replacing worn cellular components, maintaining the fidelity of protein synthesis, these are metabolically costly processes. Running them at maximum efficiency would allow cells to maintain themselves indefinitely in principle. But running them at maximum efficiency would also consume enormous resources that could otherwise go toward reproduction. In a world where external mortality, predation, disease, starvation kills most organisms long before cellular aging would become relevant, investing maximum resources in cellular maintenance is a poor evolutionary strategy. You're paying full price for an insurance policy that will almost never pay out, because something will kill you before your cell's self-maintenance failures become your actual cause of death. By the way, if you want to go even deeper into the secret lives of ancient humans, I just launched a full course called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans. 10 modules, 3+ hours of content covering everything we never talk about on YouTube. What they feared, how they communicated, what hunted them, and much more. Plus an exclusive PDF guide included. Link in the description. See you inside. The optimal strategy, from an evolutionary perspective, is to underinvest in cellular maintenance. Run the repair systems at good enough rather than perfect. Devote the saved resources to reproduction instead, because reproduction generates the fitness returns that natural selection actually tracks. The cells will eventually fail, but probably not before the predators get you, and probably not before you've reproduced enough to pass your genes forward. The soma, the body, that is, in this framework, disposable. It is a vehicle for getting genes into the next generation. Once that job is substantially done, the vehicle's ongoing maintenance is of limited evolutionary relevance. Natural selection built the vehicle to be robust enough to last through the reproductive period and invested no further in its durability beyond that. We, with our unusually long lifespans relative to other mammals of similar body size, have outlasted the evolutionary expectation. We are living in the territory our biology was not designed for, not because evolution failed to anticipate it, but because evolution had no reason to prepare for it. The selective environment in which our biology was shaped killed most people long before aging became the primary threat. We have, through medicine and technology and social organization, dramatically reduced the external mortality that kept most of our ancestors from reaching ages where cellular deterioration becomes the main event. And now we find ourselves in bodies built for a shorter, harder existence, experiencing the accumulation of maintenance failures that evolution never bothered to prevent. There is an objection that arises at this point with reasonable regularity. What about species that don't seem to age in the conventional sense? The naked mole rat, a hairless, wrinkled, profoundly unfortunate-looking rodent native to East Africa, lives approximately 10 times longer than other rodents of comparable size. It maintains its reproductive capacity into advanced age. Its cancer rates are remarkably low. It shows negligible senescence, meaning its mortality risk does not increase significantly with age the way it does in most mammals. A 20-year-old naked mole rat is not dramatically more likely to die than a 5-year-old naked mole rat. For most animals, including humans, mortality risk increases exponentially with age. For naked mole rats, the curve is almost flat. Certain species of tortoise show similar patterns. The ocean quahog clam has been documented at ages exceeding 500 years. Greenland sharks may live for 400 years or more, reaching sexual maturity only after about a century and a half. Certain jellyfish species appear capable of reverting to an earlier developmental stage when stressed, theoretically cycling indefinitely. These examples are crucial because they demonstrate that aging is not biologically inevitable. In an absolute sense, the machinery for substantially extended lifespan, even near negligible senescence, exists and functions in real species on Earth right now. Evolution found solutions to the aging problem in these lineages, which means the solutions are biologically possible. So why didn't evolution find those solutions in us? The answer returns to ecology and the selective environment. Naked mole rats live in underground colonies with very low external mortality, protected from predators by their subterranean lifestyle and their cooperative colony structure. In a low external mortality environment, Investing in cellular maintenance and extended lifespan actually pays fitness dividends because individuals live long enough that aging becomes the primary mortality risk. Selection can see late life decline and work against it. The same logic that makes selection blind to late life decline in short-lived animals under high predation pressure makes selection responsive to late life decline in long-lived animals under low predation pressure. Our ancestors lived under high external mortality pressure for most of our evolutionary history. Selection never had sufficient reason, in the cold arithmetic of fitness, to invest in the cellular maintenance machinery that would produce naked mole rat-style longevity. We got the maintenance investment appropriate to the selective environment we evolved in, and that investment was calibrated for a world where few individuals made it past 40 in the wild, not for a world where medicine and sanitation have extended average lifespans into the 70s and 80s. The evolutionary framework also illuminates a pattern in aging that many people observe but rarely think about mechanistically: the striking difference in how early life systems and late life systems function. Development, the process of building a human body from a single fertilized cell, is orchestrated with extraordinary precision. The timing of developmental events is tightly regulated. Errors in development are caught and corrected by robust quality control systems. The process is, by any measure, remarkably reliable. Most humans develop through the same sequence of biological events in roughly the same time frame, producing bodies of similar organization despite the enormous complexity of the construction project. Aging, by contrast, is variable, inconsistent, and poorly regulated. Different tissues age at different rates. Different individuals age at dramatically different rates. The same person can have organs with significantly different biological ages. The processes driving late-life deterioration are not coordinated. They are a collection of independent failure modes, each driven by different mechanisms, accumulating at different rates in different tissues. This contrast is exactly what evolutionary theory predicts. Development happens before reproduction and directly determines whether an organism can reproduce at all. So, selection has been extremely powerful in optimizing it. Aging happens after reproductive success is largely secured, so selection has been correspondingly weak, and the processes of late-life decline have never been subjected to the same relentless optimization that development has received. We are the product of brilliant engineering applied to the problem of building a body, and minimal engineering applied to the problem of maintaining it. The construction is extraordinary. The maintenance plan was written with considerably less attention. One of the more counterintuitive implications of this framework involves the concept of trade-offs in ways that extend beyond biology into something resembling life philosophy. If antagonistic pleiotropy is correct, if genes that promote early vitality carry late-life costs, then the biology of youth and the biology of aging are not separate systems that evolution could fix independently. They are the same system, viewed at different points in time. Eliminating late-life decline might require dismantling some of what makes early life work. The inflammation that responds vigorously to infections in young immune systems may become the chronic low-grade inflammation that drives cardiovascular disease and neurodegeneration in old immune systems. The cellular proliferation that heals wounds in young tissue may become the uncontrolled proliferation we call cancer in old tissue. The same processes, the same genes, the same biological machinery, doing useful work in youth, causing damage in age. This means that the fantasy of biological immortality, of simply preventing aging while keeping everything else the same, may be more complicated than it appears. You cannot necessarily fix the late life costs without paying an early life price. The trade-offs are embedded in the architecture. Evolution didn't fail to see a simple fix. The fix may not be simple. Disentangling the early benefits from the late costs is one of the central challenges of aging research. And progress has been real. But the problem is genuinely hard. There is also a demographic and social dimension to this story that rarely receives the attention it deserves. For almost all of human evolutionary history, the proportion of the population living long enough to experience substantial aging was small. High infant and child mortality, the hazards of young adult life, infectious disease, violence, and the general brutality of pre-modern existence meant that relatively few individuals reached ages where deterioration became the dominant story. This matters for the evolutionary argument because it reinforces how weak selection pressure against aging truly was in the environment where our biology was shaped. A trait affecting only a small fraction of the population has limited selective impact regardless of how dramatically it affects those individuals. When most people died young, genetic variants causing problems in old age affected a small slice of the total population, and a small slice of the total reproductive output. Selection barely registered them. We have, in the past century, made the extraordinary achievement of dramatically extending average human lifespan through public health improvements, medical intervention, and reduction of the external mortality that shaped our evolutionary biology. In doing so, we have moved a large proportion of the human population into the age ranges where aging becomes the primary biological story. Ranges our biology was simply not designed for because selection never had sufficient reason to design for them. We are, in a meaningful sense, victims of our own success. We outlived our evolutionary design specifications, and now we find ourselves in the genuinely unprecedented situation of having large populations of people living long enough to experience the full consequences of evolutionary neglect, the accumulated mutations, the antagonistic pleiotropic costs, the disposable soma failing to maintain itself past its evolutionary warranty period. The science of aging research, geroscience, is now attacking these problems with tools that would have been science fiction 50 years ago. Senolytic drugs that selectively eliminate senescent cells, the exhausted, damaged cells that accumulate in aging tissues and drive inflammation. Caloric restriction and its mimetics, which appear to activate cellular maintenance pathways that evolution underinvested in. Telomere biology, epigenetic reprogramming, mitochondrial function restoration, the field is advancing on multiple fronts simultaneously. What evolution failed to do because it had no selective reason to, we are attempting to do deliberately. With intelligence, technology, and the unique human capacity to work toward goals that lie outside what natural selection tracks. We are, in a real sense, trying to override the evolutionary logic that produced aging in the first place. Whether we can succeed, and on what timescale, remains genuinely uncertain, but understanding why evolution never fixed aging is the necessary foundation for any serious attempt to fix it ourselves. You cannot engineer around a constraint you haven't correctly diagnosed. The evolutionary framework tells us that aging is not a simple mechanical failure, not a single gene gone wrong, not a problem with an obvious and isolated solution. It is a pervasive consequence of how selection works, embedded in trade-offs throughout the genome, shaped by the entire history of our species' selective environment, reflecting the fundamental distinction between what evolution optimizes for and what we actually want. Evolution optimized for reproductive success in a high-mortality environment. We want long, healthy, fully functioning lives extending well beyond peak reproduction. These goals overlapped enough to produce the remarkable bodies we have. They diverged enough to leave us with aging. The Phi engineer built something extraordinary and then walked away. We are, right now, figuring out how to finish the job ourselves. And given what we've already accomplished in a few centuries of organized scientific effort, it would be unwise to bet against us.